And I'd love for you to share about really how you have gotten the clarity of your life's purpose, your life's mission, and how that relates to water and the oceans.
So as Stu mentioned, I'm preparing to get in a 23-foot boat by myself and row 5,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean. And that's not something most people would ever choose to do, right? Spend that volume of time with yourself, with the ocean, and also at great risk. And I wasn't a rower or a sailor before I started this. When I rowed in 2020 from California to Hawaii, I had never been to sea before that. A lot of this started with depression when I was in college, studying in Minnesota, a place of great water, the headwaters of the Mississippi, right? Minnesota is the start of 3 different watersheds in the United States. I grew up in the upstate New York and the East Coast, and there wasn't much exposure to native cultures where I grew up in the Adirondacks because they've been exterminated effectively and eradicated, and the signs of them are pretty much gone. When I get to Minnesota, not only are all these place names from the Dakota and Lakota nations, but it wasn't that long ago that the native peoples were removed from these lands. And so as a young college student, found myself trying to figure out, what can I do about this legacy? And that sent me into a little bit of a depression. And what ended up coming out of that were 2 things. One, I started doing endurance sports. A friend said, "Hey, get off that sofa. Let's go do a triathlon together." So I start racing and training, and it helped me feel better, which isn't a surprise. But I also started getting involved in canoe trips, and specifically with Dakota youth. And over a couple of years, saw that I could make a difference in these communities, not by being the tip of the spear, but by helping elevate other people in the community, raising funds for experiential educators, taking people on canoe trips, and started bringing these 2 points together. Did an Ironman, raised funds for the Minneapolis American Indian Center. All of that work, continued for some years until I decided to row across an ocean and basically take it up a whole other level, which was inspired by tragedy in a different story. But that's a little bit of what led me to this spot where I realized that I can do these expeditions, use it to raise funds and awareness for causes that matter, and also be able to now support citizen science with these expeditions as well.
How did you take those challenges and turn those into opportunities? And how has rowing been that vehicle, that medium for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate that life presented solutions for me at the right time. It was a roommate that said, "Hey, let's go do this triathlon together," and that led me to getting into endurance sports. And then in 2016, I was living in London, getting my MBA, and my father took his own life. And it was in the aftermath of that I decided to row across an ocean. As you can imagine, I was going through all the feelings after he died. And that's when I saw a film. A few months later, I saw a film about a woman who had rowed around the world. And I knew immediately I needed to do that. And it started off as just a knee-jerk reaction to get away. I wanted to be alone in the middle of the ocean, and it appealed to me greatly on a personal level. But as I started wrapping my head around what an ocean row really looks like, I realized that this is an opportunity, not just for me, but an opportunity to use that journey to inspire others and make a difference. That if there's someone who has never been to sea, wasn't a rower, wasn't a sailor, can go and do something like this, what does it say about what else we all can do together? And so that's what inspired me to create a whole brand and a whole campaign, not just do Tez doing this ocean row, but create a nonprofit called United World Challenge. And it's under that banner that I did my first row and dedicated it to raising scholarship funds to a school that changed my life. And now the second row is focused on raising funds and action for ocean plastics. But it's
so when you talk about what more can be done, we've spoken about the ocean and the plastics. With you being in the middle of the ocean and being in the center, in the heart, what do you see? What do you feel can be done for you and for us as individuals to restore the health of our oceans?
There are so many different issues facing the oceans, right? Ocean plastic is just one of them. But I chose that for this initiative because it's something people tend to know a little bit about, but are also generally quite misinformed. People know that ocean plastic is a big deal, but they think we can clean it up in the middle of the ocean. And that's just not possible. The ocean's too big and the plastics are too small. So what can be done, however, is 80% of the ocean plastic comes from rivers. That's a huge opportunity to set up an intervention in these specific point sources to stop plastic before it flows to sea. So with United World Challenge, what we're doing is partnering with an organization that leads that kind of initiative, that builds floating river barriers and non-navigable waterways in Indonesia and elsewhere, stopping plastic before it flows to sea. And that's really one of the big opportunities, is looking at where are these sources in rivers and stopping it there. Now, of course, you need to stop it flowing into the river as well, right? You can't just catch it every day and wonder where it's going into the river from. So there's multiple levels of initiatives.
Can you see Earth from a whole new perspective and dimension from water's viewpoint? I'd love your sharing your experience with us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. After spending week after week after week and then month after month seeing just water, everything else appeared to be just an illusion. Myself, my boat, just water in a different form. And when I got to Hawaii in 2020, after 71 days on the ocean, and I saw land, most people imagine that seeing land is this glorious moment of achievement, absolute elation and relief. And instead, when I saw land, it just looked like it was in the way of the water. I was like, really empathized with waves, where these waves are traveling for thousands of miles, nothing in their way. And then they bump into a pile of rocks. Like, what are these rocks doing here? You know, like, no wonder waves seem angry and they rise up and they crash. Like, get out of my way. So I very much empathized with water and waves traveling and then landing on shore. And that's how I felt when I got off my boat. Like, I was a wave washed ashore and was struggling to figure out where to orient myself and integrate the experience on the ocean. This kind of connection to the ground control, right? There's no support boat, no chase boat. So when things break, I solve it with what I have in my spaceship, in remote touch with people back on land who know what I have, and do a little Apollo 13 thing, which happens from time to time. But it is super remote. In fact, at times in my first row, and I expect in this next one, the people nearest to me are in the International Space Station, 260 miles away. So it is very analogous to a space expedition.
Yeah. What's it like being in that mental state of solitude, of aloneness? Is there, waves of fear, sadness? Is there waves of complete, utter peace and ecstasy? Bring us back to some of those emotional experiences you've had, particularly in your mind.
There's a little bit of everything, and it changes quickly. So looking back in my journal after the first row, I would see one day I wrote, this was the worst idea ever. I want this to end. When will it end? I was so stupid. And then the very next day, I'm loving it. This is the best. So it's the full spectrum, and it switches very quickly. There were a few very acute tests during the row. It's like I was being tested, and if I would pass, I'd go to the next level. One of these tests was my rowing seat breaking in the row, and the rowing seat is really essential, right? It's not. And I spent a month just obsessing over all these different ideas and trying to fix it. And sometimes thinking to the future is helpful, right? You do contingency planning, think of what might go wrong and come up with a scenario for how you could possibly solve that. And sometimes that's really helpful. It's helpful in business, it's helpful in life to not walk into a situation blind, but there are diminishing returns to everything. including problem solving. And what I found is I was obsessing over all these ideas and coming up with wild moonshot ways to make a brand new seat from scratch out of spare oars and chopping bits apart on my boat to try and keep this thing moving. And then finally, after 30 days of thinking about it, on day 45, came up with a new idea. The bearings had been wearing out because of the seat being off kilter, and I didn't have any replacement bearings. So it was a whole new problem created by the previous problems. And I realized that day, hang on, I have these bits of plastic form cards. It's like a credit card size of piece of plastic that's moldable when it's very hot. So I cut it into little strips and I put it in my camp stove and boiled water and took out these little strips and rolled them in my hand to replace the bearings in my seat that were grinding to dust from the seat being off kilter. And I put those new bearings in the wheels and put the seat on the track, and it worked perfectly. And what's really wild about that is that nothing in my boat changed. Nothing in my resources changed. The only thing that changed was how I viewed them and related to it. And what helped leading up to that point was, instead of trying to catalog and organize everything and think through problems and think through solutions, was just coming back to this one powerful idea, telling myself everything I need is in my boat. Because I kept thinking about what I don't have. I don't have the spare bolt. I don't have the spare bearings. I don't have a spare seat. I don't have access to land to get what I need. And instead, telling myself everything I need is in my boat helped me view what I had in a different way, and then solve the problem in a whole new way. And from then on, I absolutely loved being at sea. The first 45 days were not very fun often, but the last 30 days, approximately 25 days, I just loved it at that point. I had this trust that it would work out, and was just grateful to be able to be there and witness the ocean, and to be able to share the story with people who were following along online.
I have questions. I'm so inspired, Taz, and I'm thinking of Mina Goli's work. Do you get together? There are these life-changing, death-defying feats like yours and hers, and I'm wondering if folks like you all get together in a special club or something to egg each other on, or to share, your best practices and your speaking opportunities. It's very encouraging.
Thanks, Mary. I don't know Mina personally, but I've been following her for a couple of years. She definitely does some very cool work. I'm sure there are such clubs. I was recently introduced to Alex Bellini, who's also an explorer, does really awesome conservation work, fantastic content. So they kind of get to know each other a little bit. But the closest thing that I've gotten to a club around water is the ultramarine ocean impact community. Ultramarine is it's a community, and it's an annual summit hosted on Necker Island in the Caribbean, and it brings together entrepreneurs, financiers, athletes, educators, artists, people of all different backgrounds, so we can get to know each other and collaborate for ocean conservation, ocean science.
Questions. First of all, how did you eat when you were in that boat all by yourself? And secondly, you spent weeks and months surrounded just by marine life. And so did you get a deeper sense of connection with that type of life as opposed to land-based life?
I eat a lot of dehydrated meals. Gets pretty boring. Don't do an ocean row for the cuisine. Eat around 4,000, maybe 5,000 calories a day, depending on the day. Dehydrated meals, snack bars, protein shakes. And for marine life, yeah, it was really quite interesting. I saw a lot of whales in my first day leaving from Monterey Bay. I saw a lot of birds across the whole ocean, which I didn't realize the ocean is covered in birds. There are pelagic species of birds that spend 10 months a year at sea and come back to land just to nest. And I thought back to land to birds on land and realized birds on land are actually adapted to land. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's like the birds on land spend a great deal of their time on their feet, and their feet are designed for grasping, and they're very comfortable in trees. And these water birds, many of them don't even like to land on the water. They're so good at flying that they'll sleep while flying with unihemispheric sleep, as in they close their left eye and they rest the right side of their brain. And so they can alternate like that, just like dolphins do, and be able to sleep on the wing. And as I looked at these birds flying around me, crossing thousands of miles of ocean, I just realized these things are truly animals of the air. The birds on land are animals of the land, but the birds on the ocean are animals of the air in a very different way. And they're just having those for company is super inspiring and beautiful to witness. The one thing that was really sad to me was I only saw 3 sharks in 71 days. And it's an indication of the health of our oceans, just the lack of sharks.
So we say mahalo and wish everyone peace. May we have peace at this time in all cultures all over the planet, with all species, not just the human species, but with our animal species and with our trees and our plants and our birds. And we all deserve that, to care for each other and love one another and truly be united and united in our waters. So
Hello, thank you all. If you want to follow the journey, just look up United World Challenge. That's me.